in theory, we're outside, but if that sun gets into those clouds, then I might retreat inside. But,
Okay. Well, what a great scene to set the interview to.
well, for anybody watching it, it gives them something to look at, so they can stop listening to what we're saying and go, "Oh, look, can you see that?"
And I'm
So,
sure
yeah.
this will be the moment when we have the
Yeah.
best Nessie sighting of all time, just behind you there. I'm sure the swan I see
Yeah,
ducking in
with
and
me
out of the
looking
water there is a good candidate.
me looking the wrong way.
Well, this is the thing. Well, look,
Yeah,
I wanted to talk to you actually because we met face to face recently, which was wonderful. I was at the
yeah,
loch again
cool. It was
later in the year to talk to
right
Chie.
here. Yeah,
To talk to Chie
yeah.
Kelly about her sighting, which you chaperoned really well and gave this lady the courage to come out with these fantastic images that happened right there on the beach while you were away that year. So
I
it must
was
be
I was probably at the supermarket.
okay.
Yeah, it's mildly frustrating, Andy.
Yeah.
Yes, it was literally here, right here in the bay for 2 minutes, and luckily she had a good Canon camera with a sports
Hmm.
mode on it, so she was able to rattle off what in total is 71 images, which at the moment we're in the process of putting into a sort of timeline so that you can and stabilize in the background, because obviously each frame, if you did them like a flick book and went like that through the 71 images, the background would be up and down, up and down, and up and down. So a friend who's a New Zealand filmmaker, quite a big filmmaker out there, he's compiling them into this sequence so you can actually see the progression, see the movement of the object just across the bay here. And I think what we will do eventually, when it's complete and in its best possible format, is we would release that, giving the clearest image of what the 71 photographs represent, but also sort of open source the 71 original photographs in their original condition for anybody else to make their own flick books out of, to see if they can fathom out any other hidden details. So
Wow.
yeah, it's exciting, but we're not there yet. We're on the verge of getting something together, and I think there's about half a dozen of us involved in the process, which, to me, it's the most grown-up bit of research I've ever been involved in, because it's like a team. Normally it's just me with a magnifying glass looking at a photograph going, no, it's a duck or whatever. But this is sort of a grown-up bit of but everybody, it's international. They're around the world, the ones that are working on it, all very busy with their own projects. So it's taken a bit of time, longer than I'd like it to have taken. But yeah, it's getting there.
But as far as you're concerned, I mean, you said something like these were the best photos or best possible photos of the Loch Ness monster you'd ever seen. Would you
I'd seen on the surface.
Yes.
Because initially when she showed me the photographs on her phone, she'd originally taken 71 images, but because that was 5 years ago, and she was never going to make the 70, she was never going to go public with it because she'd seen the ridicule the subjects get. So she thought, no, I'm just going to keep these to myself. I'll show friends and family. So she thought she deleted the bulk of them and just kept 15 that she thought was the most mysterious. So those are the 15 that we initially put out, thinking that's all there was. And those, to me, do defy explanation. They're probably the most mysterious pictures I've seen on the surface, and they're definitely the clearest, but they still leave you scratching your head. But of course, once those 15 went out, and they only went out as stills, so they were only really picked up by newspapers and online newspapers. Once they went out, her husband, Scott, he kept saying, I'm sure we didn't delete the other ones. I'm sure they're on a disc somewhere. We just burnt them to a disc. And then over the weekend after the pictures got released, Scott got onto me and said, found the disc. There's 71 of them. So, it gives us much more than we thought we had. It gives us the in-between bits, the bits when whatever it is underwater, then it's back on the surface and it's underwater. And, as I say, there's half a dozen of us looking at these things at the moment, and there may end up being a plausible explanation. We as yet can't see it. If I was to look for a mundane explanation, there's certainly not these ducks that you can hear making a noise. It's nothing like that. It's not something that's on the surface as such. It goes underwater and it travels for quite a distance. A possibility could be divers. It would have to be two divers because it seems the object moves around. It could be that that's what we're looking at, but in the sequence that I've seen so far, I can see no more conclusive evidence that it is divers than I can that it isn't. It's the jury's still out on this one, and so to me it's exciting because sorry.
Well, no, I can see that. I could feel that when we came for the big Loch Ness expedition that weekend, and just after it finished, I actually saw her hanging about, this lovely lady, Chie, near the Loch Ness Centre. And there was a sort of look in her face. And I thought, is this lady a tourist? She looks like she wants to say something. That's what it felt like to me. This lady wants to talk to somebody, has something to say. And I just thought, it's another tourist out here looking for Nessie. There's people all over the place looking for Nessie. And perhaps she's even a journalist, a lost foreign journalist from another country wandering about near the Loch Ness Centre. There was a
few of them, definitely.
No, I definitely saw them. None of them looked lost enough, in my opinion, but they were some good chaps among them as well. And
I don't think any of they didn't seem to be able to find what they were looking for, really.
No, and as you know, we attended for our documentaries while we had Britain, and we didn't find what we were looking for, although there were some exciting sightings throughout the weekend as well. Make of them what you will, and some very strangely elaborate and sensational newspaper headlines after, even involving ourselves, which was quite unintentional and hard to explain. Yes, the thermal drones certainly do work. Did we capture Nessie in them? No, not at all. I don't think that's what we said at any point, other than here's the footage, and yes, they work. But there you go. Newspapers have to sell headlines, and that's part and parcel sometimes of the whole process, isn't it?
It really didn't. It didn't feel to me like they were describing the same event that I'd witnessed.
Mm.
It was all blown out of proportion, I thought.
Mm.
And talking to them, they were frustrated at the time that they couldn't find any volunteers to interview. They couldn't find any flotilla of boats. I don't know, what's the collective name for a gang of drones?
A swarm, a drone swarm.
Is it? Okay, there you go. Well, they certainly didn't find that because you had the only drone.
So. Well, what was funny about this whole thing was, our mutual great friend, Alan McKenna, who's, enthusiasm for Loch Ness and the Loch Ness Exploration Group has convinced me at the time, this man has the tenacity and the love of this to not only possibly find an answer to Nessie, but unite the warring parties and get them talking to each other a little bit. The people that don't quite agree, that haven't spoken very much over the years. I could see that. And I thought, this is great. And then the Loch Ness Centre was rebranded and gave him some support. And we said, well, look, we're making a documentary about different things in Britain, weird, wild, and wonderful mysteries and histories. Let's do this expedition with you. We'll document it. They did a very good job of promoting it to the world.
It's a cool job,
it became a very big event. But then we noticed that we were sort of squeezed out of the event. Only they'd floated the whole expedition and all the science involved on the equipment we were bringing. Essentially, it was all of our. It was just our documentary, apart from the hydrophone and deep scan, which turned out just to be sort of like a diesel spewing tiny little boat with like a knackered old sonar thing on. And the pilot, by the way,
One
luckily
hydrophone.
arrived. Yeah, and one hydrophone. The pilot Al, awesome guy, wonderful guy. Had a great time with him. Not knocking the boat at all, but it wasn't that high tech thing we expected. We bought a thermal drone and an ROV and the rest of it just to get ourselves around. Took a few samples like people do, like Professor Gimble did. But similarly, I saw a lot of press. I saw a lot of international attention, which is great. The Loch needs that. But I
Yeah.
wondered, was this sort of like a promotional coup for a new business more than, the wonderful expedition we hoped it would be?
Well, you said it. I couldn't possibly comment.
Yeah, I always will say it, but I'm far enough away to say it and not
Yeah,
suffer the
yeah,
consequences.
yeah.
So I guess I
It
can.
was constructive for the exhibition centre. It's constructive for the mystery. It's frustrating for me, I must admit, because ever since that weekend, almost every single tourist that's turned up here has said, "Oh, have you seen it yet?" "No, not yet." "All right, but there was that big hunt at the end of August. Were you involved in that?" "Right, let's talk about that." And it's the world thinks that this massive expedition went on. And the frustration I feel about that is that because there hasn't really been any concrete results shown from it, that will give all the world that read all these stories that it was going to happen, biggest hunt for 50 years, if they see nothing coming of it, they're going to go, "Oh, well, if that big hunt didn't find it, it can't be in there." But you and I know, having been here and seen the content of the biggest hunt in 50 years, doesn't mean there's nothing in Loch Ness. It just means, oh God, that bug just went in my eye. It just means there's other ways to find it.
Well, it's so
But
big
on,
as
on
well.
the on the subject of, I mean, even when they were making the publicity about it, saying this will be the biggest hunt for 50 years, and I gave it a lot of thought. And I remember, the fields right next to me here, where the festival Loch Ness used to be.
Yes.
I remember on the third year when there's like the main stage, there's an amphitheatre of hill. And so all of the 30,000 capacity crowd on the Saturday night was stood on there for about an hour waiting for Fatboy Slim to come on to do his full set.
Wow.
When you looked at the main stage, it was literally here at the back of the field, and behind the main stage was that view. Hang on. That view there, right?
Yeah, I love that view.
So 30,000 people stood in that field for an hour and stared at that view. So if that's not the biggest hunt in 50 years, I don't know what is, to be honest.
Well, look, I always thought, if I was to organize a hunt of my own, it would be, huge musicians playing us onto the loch and trying to tempt Nessie forward, with some of their musical delights. I really enjoyed it there. I thought the area still had a fire, still had a desire to find Loch Ness. And talking to the researchers like yourself, like Willie, like Roland, and many other people, actually what I realized is that one of the good things about Loch Ness is the long-term researchers have always been their biggest, the biggest self-debunkers. They're always the most critical of the legend and the history. They're not just selling this legend to get, I suppose, likes and support and sales on interviews or whatever else is out there. You're willing to say, actually, this didn't quite cut it, or that bit of evidence isn't what it's all cracked up to be. How do you think that helps maintain the legend?
I think, for me personally, because a lot of people nowadays bring a lot of pieces of photographs and videos to me, because I'm here all the time and I'm known not to be here to take the mick out of the subject. People bring their bits of evidence to me, and I could easily run to the press every time and say, "Look, here's the latest thing," and they'll look at it and go, "Well, that's a duck, or that's a boat wake, or that's a piece of wood, or whatever it is." If I can see a mundane explanation, I know that if it lands on somebody's breakfast table on a Sunday morning in a Sunday newspaper, a skeptic will be able to look at it and say, you can see the boat in the background that caused those 7 humps. That's not Nessie, that's a boat wake. So there's no point me promoting something that isn't mysterious. So I am a very hard person to convince of something worthy of going up against the public domain, really, up against the critics that will pick a hole in it if they possibly can.
Sooner or later, if you become associated with that, it doesn't take people long to find out, like our Owen O'Fagan chap in Ireland. And before you know it, everybody knows she's a hoaxer. And the papers might pick it up because they want headlines, but everybody else doesn't really have time. What you want to say, and it does diminish the subject internationally in the eyes of, predictably
100%.
skeptical people that need extraordinary evidence for extraordinary claims.
And that is the frustration that, with somebody like that Irish guy, the media don't care that it's a duck or whatever he can possibly find that's moving on the surface of the water. Paddleboard, canoeists, you name it. He fires it in, and they don't care because in the days of 24-hour rolling news, it's a filler. It's a clickbait filler, and so they're the most cynical promoters of evidence you could possibly get, because they really don't care. They can see it's rubbish, but they'll punt it anyway. We can all see it's rubbish, and so I know of nobody involved in this subject that will touch him. I don't even click on his posts anymore when he gets a new sighting, because I know his motivation is those clicks, which is paying his YouTube channel, which is probably paying him better than his day job. So I won't even give him the benefit of the penny that my click would give him. But he's addicted to that role, and he thinks he's the savior of the mystery. He thinks he's promoting it better than anybody, and I don't know what will ever make him realize the damage he's doing.
Maybe he could use some of that money he's made from all of the clickbait he's produced and come for a visit and put some real hours into the expedition. But then who knows when he might turn up. You know how big those duck wakes can be on the loch, when you're unprepared for them on a flat, calm day.
Yeah. That's tragic. So I do my utmost to completely ignore it, completely not rise to it, because I can't keep my mouth shut. I just
I've got a similar problem, actually, and it's always been my problem. I'm learning. I'm sort of not
what do they call
old,
it? Discretion or something?
Tactical discretion, is that what it is?
Could be that, yeah. Never caught on, did it?
No. I mean, I'm trying. Well, I heard somebody. I don't know where the saying came from, but some famous star said, I'm too old to argue with people anymore. If you tell me 2 + 2 = 5, you're right. Have a nice life. And sometimes perhaps that's the best way forward. I definitely don't argue in any of the pages and forums with the same kind of zeal that I used to in the old days. I just think, well, hey, if that's what you want, then that's okay for you, and go for it, enjoy yourself.
I've sort of come to a feeling myself that I know when I arrived here full time in 1991, my mission statement was to convince the world that there's something worthy of examination in Loch Ness. Now, all these years later, I sort of realised that the enlightening of the outside world isn't my driving motivation. My driving motivation is my lifelong fascination with this mystery and this question. And what I'm searching for is the answers to satisfy my curiosity. And if and when any of that information that I discover along the way seeps into the public domain, that's a bonus, but that's no longer my goal. That's now, I will actively, if I see something that's mysterious and impressive, I will promote it, but that's not what gets me up in the morning. It's my own fascination. That's what keeps me watching now. Yeah.
And after, is it 32 or 33 years now? You said 91?
91, I got here.
32 years. So after 32 years of doing that, having the motivation still and the desire to get up and look is a testament not only to the mystery itself, but to the beauty of the area. I've been there twice in the last year, in the last 2 months, in fact, and found it hard. I found it hard to drive away. I thought, I like this place. I could see myself, despite the weather and the local food. It's not for me, I'll be honest. Despite all of that, I can see myself wanting to come back again and again and again.
Yeah. And, on a day like this, I mean, this is middle of November, and it's been so warm out here today, freezing cold first thing, but so warm and so beautiful that's why I'm still out here now, because we could do this interview sat in my van, but it's too nice a late afternoon to be inside of. And it has that capability. Even in February, there's days like this that it's just gorgeous. There's never a hard. No, any month of the year is stunning in its own way. Be it covered in snow, or be it those massive storms that we've been getting that come battering through. I love them. I love a good storm. Tail end of a hurricane. Yes, please. Yeah.
From inside from inside the van, of course, not out there on the veranda. Or
mostly. Yeah. Either inside the van or in the doors in. It's one or other.
Is there a risk for lightning strikes on the beach? Have you ever had that there?
Lightning striking the beach? No. I've watched a lot of lightning storms from here out there on the water, where you see it hitting the water. And I've never seen any hit the beach. It is something to watch a lightning storm coming up the loch. Yeah.
That's amazing. Excuse me. What do you think about the religious component to things like Nessie and Bigfoot and other cryptid fandoms that are out there now? There's a lot of philosophies attached to what they may or may not be, whether it's from the creationist point of view that these are surviving dinosaurs, to the aliens put them there, portals ejaculating this beast into the loch. What do you think about that?
There's a raft of different possible explanations to this mystery, and religious connotations are not the most. To me, they're completely outlandish, but they're not the most extremely outlandish that I've heard. Time portholes back to the Jurassic period, and we're seeing it through a prism lens into the Jurassic period, is probably more out there than this is anyway religious. All of the above, I think, are nonsense. Personally, it doesn't explain anything to me. But we haven't got the answer yet, and I
suppose careful people like yourself, don't speculate on what it could be. Now, I do remember you mentioning before that a Wells catfish had been, from the very, very early time when you had your sighting, had been probably the most likely candidate in your mind. But how do you feel about that now, years later?
It was actually Dick Rayner that first put me onto those. He said, you ought to look at these things. Think about Wells catfish. They tick a lot more boxes than religious explanations or any other explanations.
Eels and things, yeah.
Eels, yeah. And I'm not saying that. I've never said that is the answer. I'm just saying that, like a horse race, the horse that's out in front in this particular race, as to the explanation, is the Wells catfish. There's more plausibility to me to that than giant eels or non-physical beings from other planets or any of the other contenders. Doesn't mean that the catfish is going to turn out to be the winner. Out of nowhere could come the plesiosaur that come rearing back and surprise us all. It's at the moment that's way back in the lineup of contenders to win the race, but we don't, because you would know as well as I do the scant amount of concrete evidence that we have eyewitness testimony. We got bucket loads of that. That isn't respected by the scientific community as a form of evidence. And I must admit, over the years, I've come to understand that an eyewitness is a fallible piece of evidence. I've seen complete mistakes that the witness is absolutely adamant is a Nessie sighting, and I know it's not. So, yeah.
Well, I mean,
Witnesses.
you could pull. I could pull out a couple of hundred fairy eyewitness reports for you from pretty reasonable people when you talk to them, and yet to an outsider, we have to appreciate that saying that I've seen Nessie is almost the equivalent to saying I've seen mermaids and fairies and elves and the rest of it, because it's in that same ballpark for everybody else. Yeah. It's a creature that's not supposed to be there, and anybody who thinks they've seen it, no matter how reliable the person is, must have made some sort of mistake, an error of judgment as far as the world is concerned.
Yeah, but those explanations, in order to dismiss, I mean, you see this wake that's coming in now. Can you see that? Just come out of nowhere, rolling in.
I see it.
I don't know what the time is now, but I can bet you it's 3:15, because at 3:05, the Jacobite boat goes behind Tor Point, and it takes 21 minutes for its wake to roll in here like this. So on a day like this, flat, calm water, if, like that blue car, you've just pulled up in the car park and you haven't seen the boat that went past 21 minutes ago, you will, as many do, come running down to me saying, "Did you not just see that wake? Did you not just see that? That's Nessie." No, it's the boat that's gone out of sight. No, there was no boat. There was no boat. I've been here for half an hour. I didn't see a boat. Come back tomorrow. You'll see that same thing at 1/4 every hour. That wake will roll into the bay. And, those sort of things do fool somebody that doesn't sit here for decades and figure it out,
And somebody who wants to see it. They've traveled from wherever they've traveled in the world for this dream lifetime trip.
Absolutely.
I had my honeymoon in the Loch Ness Lodge in 2012, 2 years after we were married, and I sat in that breakfast room in the morning, peeled on the water. It was my first time at Loch Ness. I was literally transfixed on it. And then 2 years after my honeymoon, there was a report of 9 people seeing it from the dining room, a big, upturned boat-shaped hump, swim around in the bay and sink. And I was gutted. I was so gutted. But that was my dream trip at that time. So when I look at those people desperate to see something, I think, especially when you've traveled, you've come a long way, and normally people aren't willing to leave empty-handed, right?
Yeah, very much so. And I did this summer. Somebody came and reported that boat wake to me. They shot a bit of video of it, and they said, "This is Nessie. I watched you," and he was Dutch. He said, "And you were looking the other way. You didn't even see Nessie." I was like, "Well, fair enough." I said, and I explained it to him. He said, "No, not a boat. This was not a boat." And I said, "Well, it was." So anyway, he said, "No, this is my Nessie. This is my Nessie." And I said, "Fine, keep it as your Nessie. Don't go to the newspapers with it, because I will tell them that it's come back tomorrow and you'll get the same effect."
Yeah.
"Yes, it's okay. I won't show anyone else, but this is my Nessie."
Wow.
So, that's what you're saying. By all means.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there must be some management of dreams as well that goes into it. Like you say, you're managing his dream there, or are you at the point, like you just described, you would just say, "No, I'm sorry. You've made a mistake. Sorry to burst your bubble. Enjoy the rest of your holiday, but that's not what it's meant to be. And I've got to hold that firm line. Otherwise, it gets out of hand and everybody goes away. Everybody gets a prize. It's that kind of race. Meaningless at the end of the day."
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, I'm not here to disprove it anyway. I'm here to put the good evidence forward. And yeah, I'm not going to lose sleep over somebody's insistence that they've seen. I could try it with Santa as well, but there's no point. It's just.
I don't want you telling me that Santa's not real now, Steve. I'm still a
I
strong
would never.
believer.
I would precisely, exactly, precisely. I would never even try to
Yes,
put such
yes.
thoughts into your mind.
The way we've got it with the kids at the moment is that, yes, he was alive. St. Nicholas, he did die. And now these people you see around, they're helping him continue his good work. And they've been appointed by the Ministry of Santa Claus to continue the work in his name. So he was real, but is no longer. And we're memorializing the tradition. And I've got away with that, I think. I've managed to sort of swing that. I don't know how. I think it's fascinating that so many people around the world are so attracted to this legend. Going back to the beginning of it, like all legends, there's a lot of subterfuge. There's a lot of early media sensations that have muddied and clouded this water. Would you say that some of those early articles about Nessie are still causing us problems today in our mission to find out what she may be? Do they still affect the public consciousness?
Yeah, well, it dumbfounds me when I see some of the online chats that go on relating to some of the earliest photographs, for instance. Like this coming Sunday is the anniversary of Hugh Gray taking his photograph on the 12th of November, 33.
Okay.
We still, 90 years later, argue day and night as to what he photographed. And we're still no nearer a definitive, it's a dog with a stick, it's a swan, it's somebody throwing a stick in the water, all the different possibilities. And I look at a piece of evidence like that and I think, well, it's never going to be a good bit of evidence anyway, because it's not a good photograph of it. You can't see what it is or where it is for that matter. And so what are you arguing about? What's the point of this 90-year-old debate? And but then you get things like Arthur Grant that was just over here riding New Year's morning, coming home on his motorbike to go to those houses up there, and on the road just straight down below caught sight of something in the headlights of his motorbike coming down the bank and across the road and down again. I'm not sure about that at all. I'm and it's a pretty far-fetched story to me. I'm a believer in the mystery, but really, it crossed the road in front. No, yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of the early stuff and back then, 1933, people really, and that was before the surgeon's photograph, so they didn't even know the thing had a long neck for certain. They had descriptions of everything. They had a creature the size of a giant frog, this giant frog-shaped thing. The Spicers seen it crossing the road. Land sightings I struggle with, to be honest. But back then, in that gold rush of sightings, 7 humps, 10 humps, all qualified as Nessie, until they could amalgamate it into something. Well, it's got the surgeon's photograph long neck and it's got the upturned boat type back. Okay, that's enough pieces of a jigsaw puzzle to say, well, it must be a plesiosaur then. So everyone could settle down into the long pursuit for that specific explanation. Whereas before that, the possibilities were endless as to what shape this thing was. So, and the reports sort of confirmed that. The reports were so varied of different shapes and sizes. Yeah.
I mean, what's strange about that as well is a lot of people bring up this, and I know you've heard this 100 times probably, the Lost World. The Lost World had come out at that point. King Kong had also come out at that point.
Yeah.
And I think there was a plesiosaur-like creature in that original King Kong as well.
There was,
if I said that right. And that was, the age of exploration which was pretty much over then, was being reimagined once again for a viewing audience. And, could this have affected the minds and even the mental library of those viewing this strange and unusual animal. We always look at those old bestiaries in the medieval books, like the Bodleian Library that has sometimes, and you see, a big creature with a fat body and the head of a fox and fins like a fish, and the tail of a dolphin. And clearly, whoever's drawn that, it has been described. He's had to pick out these animals from his mental library to patchwork quilt this thing into existence. Could it be something like that people have been pushed into a corner? I've seen something unusual. I don't recognize it. This is what I've got in my mental library to depict this creature.
Very much so, very much. And all of those different aspects of this subject go into the melting pot, the jigsaw puzzle of evidence that gets moved around and molded into whatever shape we can possibly plausibly conjure out of it. And, for me to mold it all together and think, well, that most looks like a catfish to me, by no means does that tick all the boxes, because it doesn't explain land sightings, it doesn't explain long neck sightings, it doesn't explain multi-hump sightings. But at some point, you have to start stripping away things. You have to start thinking about all the land sightings. Am I going to stand by them? Not convinced I am. I've been here 32 years. It's not been on land in that time, as far as I know. At least nobody's seen it in that time. And there's a lot of people around here. Multi-hump sightings. I've become very proficient at watching multi-hump sightings every day. The wakes off of the boats that are around here that just cruise around the loch. And in fact, I was with Adrian Shine at the weekend. We went and saw the world premiere of They Created a Monster, Loch Ness, the new Loch Ness film, John McLafferty. Fantastic story of that, the 1970s, the 10-year period, the war between Frank Searle on this side and Adrian Shine and his gang on that side. And I was sat afterwards talking with Adrian, and we both agreed on something, which we often do. But we were talking about the boat wakes, and, one of the things that people say, oh, well, that boat wake that sighting could be caused by a boat going up the middle of Loch Ness, the waves going out, hitting the shore, coming back in and re-meeting themselves and travelling along like a standing wave going along the water.
Mm-hmm.
And I said to Adrian, that's got to be nonsense, hasn't it? And Adrian said, well, I've carried out months of trial and tried and to replicate that thing. Absolute nonsense. Doesn't happen. It doesn't happen in Loch Ness. It's not a phenomenon that we could ever begin to, if the shingle beach that the wave hits is sloped, the wave breaks and disappears. There may be a slight slew back again, but it's so.
I mean, this is not hitting walls and coming back. This has got a beach.
Yeah, no.
Other sort of off ramps there into the forest where it can dissipate.
And one thing that sort of I've learned with this subject is when I was away in Dorset before I came up here full time, and I'd read all the books about things, explanations by whoever, Stuart Campbell or any of the skeptical authors. There's been Binns and people could say, oh, well, that sighting was the waves re-meeting themselves and going up the middle of the loch. But it's not until you get here and spend time sat here watching that you realise that those explanations don't actually fit the location. I mean, there's a one that I particularly hold up as an example. It's in Stuart Campbell's book, and it's about, I think the guy was called Mackenzie, and he lived up there at Abraken in that saddle of hills, and he was up on that hilltop just there above it, collecting heather for his roof it was something like 1884, I think it was something like that. So it was massively before the gold rush, the 30s gold rush. He was up there, and so he was up on that mountaintop over there, looking down on water like this, and just here, can you see Tor Point?
I see it, yeah.
Tor Point's there. just off of Tor Point, much where that orange buoy is there, he watched something cavort and turning in the water, much as Aldi Mackay reported. So that's where Aldi Mackay had her sighting there as well, much later on. Stuart Campbell, in his book, puts that sighting down as an otter. Now, the distance from Tor Point to the top of that hill up there, that's about 3/4 of a mile. And the disturbance an otter could possibly make at Tor Point here is negligible. And certainly Mackenzie would not have seen it, and he wouldn't have described it as he did. But Stuart Campbell is writing his book based on the fact that the people that are reading it are never going to sit here with his book and go, hang on
a second.
That otter doesn't explain that. So that's a lot of another classic one, and that involves right here as well. Remember the explanation? Oh, it's circus elephants.
Oh wow, yeah. I read that one again recently.
Yeah. Well, the circus elephants would have been going to Inverness. That's almost a song. And the only way they would ever have been involved with Loch Ness if they'd previously been at Fort William and they were heading to Inverness. And if it was before 1933, that road over that side wasn't opened. So the elephants would have come down the old General Wade's military road down this side of Loch Ness, heading for Inverness from Fort William. They would want to bathe the elephants before the parade into town. Dores Beach is the last location before Inverness that they could bathe their elephants. And right here on this beach is a perfect situation. You just can bring your elephants down, put them in here, wash them off, take them to Inverness. Now, the 20-odd houses in this village that overlook this beach where I am now, if half a dozen elephants came down here, there ain't nobody that lives in one of these houses overlooking this bit of water that's going to say, oh, I wonder what that is. They're going to say, that's the circus in town. Look at the elephants. And if you were over there at a Brecon on the other side of the loch, there is no way you would see half a dozen elephants in the water right up against the beach here at Dores. So that explanation doesn't hold water when you look at the locations that it must have taken place at. Yeah, it wasn't elephants bathing. So yeah, in order to figure these things out, eh?
I was just going to say, isn't that interesting? You have to be there to gain the perspective of how these sightings occurred and the unusual nature of what people saw because of the distance at which they stood, at which a seal or an otter or even, a small whale would be hard pushed to emulate.
Yeah, and the whale would have to come out here on the bus. It couldn't come up through the,
How would it get there? Exactly. Yeah.
So until you actually sit and look at the locations, these explanations remain skeptical explanations that a lot of people accept. Oh, that was just circus elephants back in the day, and people have just carried on that belief. Or it was just otters, or it was just waves colliding. Well, you actually sit there and spend a decade or two looking at it and thinking about it, contemplating, is that an explanation that is good enough? No.
And it's not. So do you find that sometimes the hardcore believers and hardcore skeptics, there's a line that joins them really, and some of the things that they have to believe in order to explain the Loch Ness Monster are outlandish on both sides of the camp?
Yeah, I suppose they are. I'm not sure. I try to veer away from the outlandish personally, but I certainly do know many staunch believers that believe things about Loch Ness that I think is absolute nonsense. Plesiosaurs, for one. Plenty of people still think they're the explanation. There's no plesiosaurs in Loch Ness. I'd love it to be the case. That's what I came here to find. I've satisfied my own curiosity enough now to say, nah, they're
There's
not
got to
swimming
be
about
something
in.
else, and
Yeah,
not an air breather, something else that's
yeah.
that could at least emulate some of the aspects of that creature to explain perhaps next sightings and things like that.
Good longevity on it.
Mm.
But as I've said before, I think that if we have had a small population of something that maybe has a lifespan of 100 years, which the world's catfish does, I think we are possibly looking for the last one or two now.
Oh wow.
I really do think that in my time being here, the number of sightings have dropped off till this year on the surface. I don't know what Gary Campbell would have on his list of sightings this year, but I've heard of nothing that's been particularly impressive to me this year that I can think of. The thing we were talking about with Cheese, that was 5 years ago. She took those
Yeah.
photographs. That was
Well, there were
impressive.
the two swimmers with the 3 humps out in the water. I saw that that little
Oh,
clip
that was
they
part of the
caught.
quest. Yeah.
Yeah, I saw that, and
Yeah.
that, I mean, that definitely, you can definitely see it resting, whatever the humps are, and then submerge. That bit's
Yeah.
clear in the footage, but so far away, it must be a mile out even. You know, really
Yeah.
quite hard to
Yeah.
determine what we're looking at there. And of course, while we're on the on deep scan on our first out, one of the Nessie neck sightings that were reported was clearly, you know, a limb of a tree floating with the storm, floating down the loch. We all said, "Hey, you know, I bet that'll end up in the newspapers." And sure enough, it
Was that the
did.
one that was in the back of Urquhart Bay?
It ended up there, yes. But
Yes.
we'd seen it floating along the week before, I
Yeah.
think. Yeah,
And it sits. You can see it's sort of
yeah.
hit
See
the
it
shallow
really.
water, hit the ground and stopped. But it's like a hump and a sort of neck bending up.
Yes,
Is it that? Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And I mean, look, I mean, that's just, you know, that's just part of it, really. I suppose that we all want to see that. We're all hoping for a glimpse of the Loch Ness Monster. And I've realized this in my shorter time studying these subjects, that people want to believe there is something else out there other than the mundanity that they're used to in life. There's a bit more hope, especially these days where things are very dark and gloomy.
Absolutely.
If there could be a Nessie or a Bigfoot or a, you know, pterodactyls flying across the Yorkshire Dales, that everybody would be cool with that. They'd love it. That would make things exciting and wonderful again.
And certainly with this, there is no way, you know, if Professor Neil Gemmell had come up with a flat blank, no, there is definitely nothing in Loch Ness, by the next Sunday, there would have been a new sighting and a new story in the newspaper saying, well, I've just seen it. It's, you're never going to.
It's unkillable.
Nessie's unkillable.
She's unkillable. She's undefeated.
Well, dynamite, I suppose.
Well, I suppose you give dynamite to the whole thing. Well, one thing that's really interesting to me, especially when he did that study, actually, is, as you said, recently with the quest and the assumption of the expedition taking place. Similarly with those guys, there's no way they could have had a large enough sampling of the loch and its depths to really ascertain what was and what wasn't in there. It looked to me more like a huge, you know, press coup once again for this new eDNA method.
Yes. Yeah. So it achieved its goal in that regard. It made a name for Professor Gemmell, and it made a technology out of eDNA. But as he said, 25% of the samplings remained unidentified. That's 1 in 4. Is that a quarter of your evidence.
Corrupted and unable to be tested?
Yeah.
Or okay, yeah, there you go.
And partly, and also unidentifiable. So,
wow. Okay. And one would assume they would have to have, whatever the Loch Ness Monster was, they would have to have its DNA on file to test it against.
Yeah. Well, obviously they didn't have plesiosaur DNA.
No.
So he just used reptilian DNA and found no reptilian DNA. But
okay. But also no otters. That was curious.
Otters didn't find otters.
In the loch.
So
I've seen them.
As much as there's definitely no plesiosaur DNA in here, so there's no reptile DNA, so there's no plesiosaurs. It's also, according to him, no otter DNA, so there's no otters. Bullshit.
I've seen them. Yeah,
I've seen
them. Yeah.
Seals, seals, no.
Yeah.
Wild swimmers that are in and out of here all the time, no.
Yeah, well, I'm sure he picked up a lot of human DNA, but just to
I don't think he did. I don't think he actually did.
He didn't pick up any
I'm
human
pretty sure
DNA?
that's not in his data. No.
That seems quite odd.
Yeah.
I think the study is still really in its infancy, and there's so many corrupted, and I don't understand it very well. I'll admit that. But there was recently a very nice kid in Somerset, the Quantox, I think, a guy named Daniel. He's very into Bigfoot, and he's started, testing footprints and things he's found with eDNA. And he had a test result that came back, and on the test result, it labeled so many animals, wood pigeon, badger, deer, the rest of it, but also old world monkey and old world ape. And they said, well, see, this is proof that there could be. I said, but the most confusing thing about this is you're saying, as well as all of these other animals, an ape and a monkey have been through here separately. Clearly, this has been corrupted somewhere. Oh, logic dictates both an ape and a monkey haven't been through here in the Quantox,
Yeah.
And I think we're putting too much stock in these types of testing at the moment. They're just not, just like our AI CGI, they're just not advanced enough to definitively fool anybody right now.
But the reasons we're putting so much stock in these things is the way it gets reported by the media. That this is the latest, greatest technology. This is the latest, greatest hunt. And so we're told, and, unless you do your own head scratching and think about it, you just suck it up and go, okay, fair enough. They're saying that's the infallible technology, but you dig into it and no, far from it.
We live in a world, Steve, where now science is infallible, which oddly goes against the scientific principle.
Yeah.
Yeah. They can't be the science, like we had that silly flu thing a few years back, but other things too. The science is settled. The science is infallible. We now know. And then 5 years later, it's like, actually put man's origination back to not Africa, but Europe, a couple of 100,000 years before that. We now know again. And it keeps going on and on and on. But every time they settle, they're sure, they're 120% sure this has got to be it. And if you're an idiot, if you disagree.
Yep. But that has been the same with science right back to the dawn of science. Yeah. The line in the sand that it represents at any one point is the definitive explanation. Then roll on 100 years. Oh no, that was completely wrong. It's now this. That has never not been the progression of science. So there's nothing to say that the point the line in the sand that we're at currently, it's not, as you say, it's not it's 100 years from now, and they'll say, well, actually, we had that completely wrong. We had that completely wrong. And believe it or not, they believe this, so.
It's amazing, isn't it? I heard recently that some doctors are thinking of bringing leeches back. And I thought it was a joke article, but it's true.
Oh, yeah, no, I think they are. Yeah,
they are, and who knows? But I mean, that's the point that we're at, and whereas I think science has discovered amazing, wonderful things. We couldn't live without it. Our lives are far, far, far better than they've ever been in the past because of those things. Hooray, science! But it's the settled, I think, aspect of that. Just before we go, just one final word for people who want to find Nessie, who are interested genuinely in the legend. How do you think they should approach this subject?
With a lot of patience and an open mind, I would say. And I certainly was talking about this recently, the advent of AI and photographic manipulation that can go on now. We are very much on the eve of a point where we are no longer going to be able to trust what we see in print with our own eyes. It's already now, I'm looking at photographs and I'm thinking, really? That's, we're seeing so many AI created images of not just this subject, but various subjects that are not true. And there's going to come a point where the only things that we're going to be able to trust is what we see with our own eyes. So to anybody with a fascination for this subject, get up here and sit in a tent on the side of the loch and satisfy your own curiosity. Walk into the villages, talk to the people that'll answer your questions. A lot of people around here would say, no, I haven't seen anything. And then they'd say to me, well, I didn't tell him about that thing I saw. I told you. Don't you tell him. So I run after them and I tell them, he saw it, he saw it.
Do you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Why should you take all of the heat, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, share the load. Well, you know what? I think as you said that lovely, and I really enjoyed talking to her husband, Chie and Scott Kelly. They were so genuine. It was the first time in a long time I've been convinced of a sighting, whatever it was, that the sighting was genuine.
Yeah.
And completely genuine. And that was wonderful. But, you know, I did start worrying for her, thinking, well, now she's going to get the heat. And she surely did, you know, just after that.
Yeah.
And
she's very much, I've been trying to take the flack of that and
I can see that.
Speak for her sincerity. And what we're all agreed, the people that are looking at these images at the moment, is you can't say for certain it is something mysterious, but we can all say this is something we as yet cannot explain. So that's the exciting part of it to me. And her sincerity in her confusion as to what she witnessed. And she's not saying, I saw the monster, I saw something. No, she's saying, I saw something, I took a load of pictures of it because I couldn't explain to myself what it was. What is it? And we're all going, give us a minute. Give us a minute. We'll get the magnifying glass out on this one.
I just talked to my team of international experts.
Exactly. Yes.
Come back to you in a few months with an answer. Yeah. Amazing. Steve, I should let you go. As always, I really appreciate it. It was great meeting you face to face, and also to just experience the loch twice this year. You know, I feel really lucky. Once we got the ROV working it and got back to it.
Yeah.
You were away at the time.
Anytime, Andy, because I do think you're one of the good ones.
Oh, thank you.
You are. That's the impression I get from you, that you're sincere and inquisitive.
I'm trying. You know, it's still that childhood delight, and I still find some of it. You know, but despite the genre, occasionally, which can be a bit tough, I still find that delight. So being there, we did have the conversations. Got a wife and kids. When I got back, about is it plausible? Could we live there? We decided we couldn't right now, and we're institutionalized. We've been Londoners for 14 years. You know, she's been here 17, and that's a hard. You know, we've been Shawshanked. That's a difficult thing to walk away from and get used to the quiet again. But who knows? Maybe it'll happen one day. Yeah.
Get your little rock hammer and start chiseling away at the wall behind the poster.
That's right. Get my, what was it?
You'll escape one day if you
J. Mansfield, Bordeaux. Yeah, get my posters up. Right, I'm going to leave you too, but have a great day.
Will. And you, anytime.
Yeah, okay.